time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us, even when pressed by the demands of inner truth. Men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. What do they think as we test out our latest weapons on them, just as the Germans tested out new medicine and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe? Now that is little left to build on save bitterness. We are met by deep but understandable mistrust. To speak for them is to explain this lack of confidence in Western words, and especially their distrust of American intentions now. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. This way of settling differences is not just. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as one who loves America. To the leaders of our own nation, the great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours.
Must be ours. You were listening to Martin Luther King, a 1967 speech. How appropriate is it that we're listening to it today, and how fitting is it for this time that we're living in? So today again, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to Thinking Without Borders, and again in the studios of ACR TV, African Caribbean Radio and Television. My name is Hans. And in the next 45 minutes, we will be sharing our time together. We will be traveling and discussing the issues of the day, and especially the issue that has been in the front page for the last 2 weeks, and that being the issue of Palestine and the issue of Israel. So Israel and Palestine. One thing that I would add is that yesterday, Mahmoud Abbas, the representative of Palestine, had an opportunity to be at the UN to speak in what was the 65th anniversary of the time when this partition began to take hold, and in 1947, when Israel had been granted the right by the UN to sort of have a state where Palestine was. And so what we'll be doing today is we're going to be having a discussion on this. We're going to be trying to see how well we can craft it, bringing the information out, because most often this issue has been looked at as something that is not only conflicting, but confusing, and sometimes people take sides on a religious basis. Others take side because they're not quite sure, and others really just don't care. It's not happening in their place, in their homes. You know, it's a faraway land in the Middle East. Let them deal with their problems. So in fact, these issues, nevertheless, are reminiscent of things that have taken hold, things that have taken place in the world that we live in different times. You know, they're calling Israel apartheid state because of what they've done to a particular grouping of people in which their land was stolen from them with military force and pushback. This was a time when, after World War II, when Europe and the United States could easily say to the Soviet Union, you deal with the East, you know, the eastern part of Europe, and then we will deal with the rest of the world as we see fit. And this is what we're seeing. And this is the continuation of what took place then. But yesterday, there was a recognition of Palestine, with the General Assembly having voted overwhelmingly to recognize Palestinians or Palestine as an observer capacity at the UN. But what's really essential in this process is that they are being recognized, so they will be seated in the General Assemblies as an observer status, which means they cannot vote. But what we'll do today is we will have two Jews, no Palestinians speaking on their behalf, but two Jews. Those two Jews, one an American Jew whose parents were in Auschwitz and in the concentration camps, the other one an Israeli Jew. And what we'll be able to take from them is what is their take, what is their narrative, and how different is their narrative from what you've been listening to in the press that you listen to in the U.S., the press that you listen to in Israel, or the press that you may be listening to that comes at the BBC in Europe. Or maybe there's not enough of the Palestinian point of view. But as the world changes, as people begin to sort of grow in consciousness, they feel the need to sort of press on issues that are of critical nature and to take a side. And this is what you're going to have to take. You're going to have to take a side because there is a side to be taken. And we will evaluate, we will go over it, and you will make a determination from what we will be presenting. And we will start with Norman Finkelstein, the American Jew, as he addresses a group of people, by and large, at least a good number of them, American Jews, and how they quite often, irrespective of what Israel does, bombing on children, that's okay because it's self-defense. It's rephrasing, it's rewriting history with language. In other words, it's making a guy who probably is sort of the bully who's armed in a classroom. So when a small kid kicks him in the shin, and then you have to now say, he's got to defend himself. But he's been bullying people all over. And he bullies people continually. That's what he does. So we will do an evaluation. We will see exactly, is that statement that I just made, is it accurate? We will listen to not only Norman Finkelstein, but we'll also listen to Miko Peled, which is the Israeli Jew who has now understood the dynamics of what's taken place, and he will put it to light today so that you, me, will have a better understanding as to what's going on. So we will go straight to Norman Finkelstein as he addresses a group of children, a group of people that are discussing this issue with him.
Go ahead.
Hi. During your speech, you mentioned Jewish people as well as certain people in your audience, not Jewish people in general, but certain people, especially in your audience, to Nazis. Now, that is extremely offensive when certain people are German. And they're also extremely offensive to people who've actually suffered under Nazi rule.
I don't respect that anymore. I really don't. I don't like and I don't respect the crocodile tears the crocodile tears. No. Folks, allow me to finish and allow me to finish. Listen, sir. Allow me to finish. Sir, I don't like to play before an audience the Holocaust card. But since now I feel compelled to. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother, please shut up. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on my father's side,
the Jews did not take arms against the
my late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. Both of my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it's precisely and exactly because of the lessons my parents taught me and my two siblings that I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture, the brutalization, the demolition of homes that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. So I refuse any longer to be intimidated or browbeaten by the tears. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians, not for what's being done. What?
I think you've heard it loud and clear from Norman Finkelstein. And what happens generally, it's if you can mute other voices like that, if you can mute voices that are speaking truth to power, then it sort of creates this cloud of confusion because all you're hearing is Israel, Israel, Israel. And it comes out of two perspectives. One of it is a European perspective. It really is. And I really don't like to play that card. You can't believe. But we have to look at, since the birthing of Christopher Columbus, the European world has brought disaster upon disaster on humanity. And so what they've been able to do, and I'm going to give you this piece because as we go further, I will explain it even more. They've been able to take European Jews and to be able to place them in an area that is predominantly Muslims, Arabs. That's pretty much what they've done. So they've been able to place them and creating what? Creating a conflict, creating a state of crisis. That's what they've done. The other thing is, the other doesn't count. In other words, the human being in the process is only one. As far as they're concerned, it's only one. It's the European Jew in this particular instance. And what it means is that the Palestinian is cannon fodder. You could just get rid of them whenever you want. They are not that important. Their lives are not that important. So when you bomb them, and the ratio sometimes said between 1 to 50, but when you're bombing somebody that really can't fight back, it's 1 to 100. The very little that Palestinians have done, throwing missiles here and there, it doesn't do anything. It really doesn't. And it really serves, a lot of times that serves the interests of Israel when you do that. Because you're not hitting any targets. And certainly, I don't think it's an appropriate approach. And we certainly are making this kind of, as we discuss this issue, we want to look at the question of, when you put some young kids are putting a bomb on themselves, and they go out there and create these kinds of scenarios where, and guess what? I mean, you could understand the kind of deprivation, you could understand the kind of despotism that is in a state that doesn't have the capacity to fight back equally and uses these kinds of self-bombs, to sort of light this in the middle of a crowd, to light this with people that could be considered as innocent. And I say it could be. I put a question mark to it because a lot of times they are, because they're a civilian, but a lot of times also maybe they have kept this process ongoing, not having spoken when they should have. But still, I think it needs to be denounced because, in fact, it creates this kind of mindset that it's okay to bomb, civilian populations, which Israel does, rampantly. So let's listen to Miko Peled. In fact, Miko Peled, not only is he an Israeli Jew, but he is also the son of a general that took part in the creation of Palestine in 1948. That took part in the creation of Israel in 1948. So therefore, Peled comes from the belly of the beast. He comes from inside. And for a long time, he had the inside perspective. And now, he's had to step back. He's had to step away. And when you step away and you begin to see the world for what it is, he sees the other, the one that has always been muted, and he begins to understand the plight of the Palestinians. So let's go to the first clip with Miko Peled.
I was to begin my remarks with a disclaimer, and that disclaimer is this. If anybody here came hoping to hear a balanced presentation, then they're going to be sorely disappointed. I say this because a lot of the things that you're about to hear tonight are difficult to hear. And also because I don't believe that a balanced presentation on this topic is possible. Anybody that cares enough to speak about this probably has a very strong opinion one way or the other. Almost everybody has feelings and strong emotions on this issue one way or the other. For me, it's deeply personal. And the issue itself is not a balanced issue. There is no balance in this issue. So therefore, I say there cannot be a balanced presentation on this. And I think if anybody claims that their presentation is balanced, they're either misleading themselves or they're misleading their audience. This whole issue of Israel and Palestine is covered in so much myth. And there's so much double standard when people talk about this issue. And I'll give you two examples. I don't know if you heard Bibi Netanyahu's speech at the United Nations. I heard it not live, but after he actually delivered it. And he began it with probably the two most striking examples of myth and double standard. And he began by talking about the right of return of the Jews to their ancient homeland. And of course, the Jews that returned, so-called returned to their homeland, were not exactly the same Jews who were expelled from their homeland, right? Because these were expelled a couple of thousand years before that. These were not their descendants either, because this has been a very long time. So these are people, the people that actually came back, so to speak, are people that claim some kind of a heritage, some kind of a connection, a relationship to the ancient Hebrews. And they claimed that they had the right to return to their homeland, and this is what Zionism was about, and this was accepted by the world as the right. They had the right to return. Now, if we talk about the right of return of one nation, you'd expect that there would be, if we accept it as a principle, then you'd expect that we'd accept it in general, across the board. Yet when people talk about the right of return of Palestinians to their homeland, suddenly a red line comes up and everybody says, no, we can't talk about the right of return of the Palestinians. This has to be taken off the table. This is not negotiable. The right of return of the Palestinians is not acceptable. What's interesting about that is that the right of return of the Palestinians, quite often we talk about the actual people who had to leave their homes. And if they had already passed away, then we're talking about their direct descendants, people who still have the keys and the deeds to their homes, and quite often can go to the very spot where a village existed, where today there might be a highway, and will point out the mosque, and will point out the well, and will point out the door to their home. Yet they do not enjoy the right to return. So obviously, this is a double standard of immense proportions. The other thing Bibi talked about right off as he started was about King David, who reigned some 3,000 years ago, and here we are today as his descendants. What's interesting is, besides the fact that there is no historical evidence that King David ever existed, outside the Bible, which of course is not a historical document, and Israeli archaeologists have all but turned up the entire country to find proof that he ever existed. Today, as we speak, an entire town, an entire community is being kicked out of their homes and forced into exile through violence in order to prove that King David existed in a place called Silwan. It's a community of 50,000 people right outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. Yet the world sees nothing wrong with this. American money is poured into this project to build what is called the new city of David, an archaeological park. And a community of 50,000 Palestinians has to be terrorized in order to leave. Their homes are being destroyed in order to make this point, this fictional, mythical connection between the ancient kingdom of King David and today's Israel. So these are just two examples. And it was interesting that Bibi Netanyahu decided to kick off his speech at the United Nations with these two things. But what I'd like to do today is just begin with a little bit of history.
Yeah, sure.
And if you go ahead, hit the first slide.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
People talk about the fact that this conflict, the conflict in the Holy Land, the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has been around for so long that it's really not something anybody can ever solve. It's been going on for thousands of years. People have been killing each other there forever. This is not true. And a good place to start, if we're going to talk about how this conflict began, a good place to start would be on the 29th of November, 1947. The day that the United Nations accepted the resolution to partition Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And this ridiculous map is what they came up with. Now, when you look at this map, before you even hear about the details, before we even touch on the details of this map, just by looking at it, it's unbelievable that anybody expected that this would work. And of course, this didn't even last one day. In 1947, there were two communities living parallel lives. We had the Jewish community that numbered about 500,000, maybe a little bit less than 500,000, that were expecting and hoping to become a state. And you had the Arab community, the Palestinian Arab community, of about 1.5 million people who were also in the process and had the expectation of becoming a state. Yet when the United Nations came up with this ridiculous plan, they chose to give the larger portion of the country to the smaller community, to the Jewish community, and the smaller portion of the land to the larger community. And then people said, and to this day you hear people say, see, the Arabs, the Palestinians, did not accept the partition plan, so all this is their fault. Is anybody mad enough to think that they would accept this? Would anybody in their place have accepted something like this? Obviously not. And obviously, like I said, this did not last even a single day. Because as soon as the resolution was accepted, the Zionist forces, what was called the Haganah, the Palmach, began a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing. Now, the story that we hear, the myth that we're told about 1947, and I heard it once again today, earlier today, at the Seattle Times, is that in 1947, after the United Nations finally recognized the right of the Jewish people to have their own state, the Arab armies attacked, intending to destroy this fledgling state, this young Jewish community. And this is only several years after the Nazi Holocaust. Yet somehow, between the end of 1947 and the end of 1948, the Zionist forces were able to conquer almost 80% of the country, destroy over 500 towns and villages, including schools and mosques and churches and homes, and exile almost 1 million people within a 12-month period. How did they do this if they were being attacked by massive armies from the outside? But once again, when we look at the facts, we realize that in 1947, the Jewish community, the Zionist community, had quite a substantial military force. They had a force of close to 40,000 armed men, well-trained, well-indoctrinated. My father was one of them. There was no equivalent on the Palestinian side. The Palestinians have never had a military force.
The Palestinians have never had a military force. They do get weapons at times, and they've reacted. But if you listen very carefully in the news last week, as soon as this thing happened, Hillary Clinton, the first thing she said, Israel has the right to defend itself. The bully has the right to beat up on the smaller guy all the time. Barack Obama, the President of the United States, said the same thing. Israel has the right to defend itself. And that is the narrative. That is what you hear over and over and over again. And quite often, I think about this, and you think of a world in which people of color, poor people, working class people, They're always getting the shorter end of a stick, and it perpetuates itself. It's something that is just ongoing. It really speaks volume in terms of what this construction of what you call the political framework, the social framework, the economic framework of this world is about. Because it speaks much more about money, APAC, the role that it plays in the mainstream functionality of American politics at the Congress level. So everybody that is there, that's their tune. That's the tune they're going to sing. Because if they don't, they won't get elected. So this is the paradigm. But what's important, something else that it struck in my mind when I was listening to this, because I was playing this, I've been playing this in my head for a while. And I said, what does this situation remind me of? It reminds me of two states. It reminds me of South Africa, in which the Europeans went there, the Dutch, the Germans, and later some English, called themselves Afrikaners. Not Africans, Afrikaners. So, and what they were able to do is to use the help of England, which England is also implicated in Israel of 1948. So is the United States. They use, with the help of England and then certain European powers, and also the United States later on, to partition pretty much the land. And the majority of people in Africa, in South Africa, 80% of them, they were getting 13% of the land. Whereas these Afrikaners have represented 13% of the population, or less. They were getting 87% of the land. Does that seem like a very close balance? Israel was awarded a land by the UN to take 56%. And you will hear, he'll talk about that. Miko will talk about that specifically. And you see this partition. But there's another country that it reminds me of. It reminds me of this country. And when they came in, as one Indian chief said, why do you fight to get things that we can give you? We can give you whatever you want. We are willing to share. But it was the mindset of we have to conquer. We have to take. Because in that, it has this sort of, this pervasive excitement of taking and stealing what's not yours, instead of collaborating and working together. And that's one of the things. But if you look again at the history books, the Indians are vilified. The other guy is always vilified. He is the other. He doesn't count. If you look at Vietnam again, it's always they replay the number of American lives that were lost. Because the Vietnamese don't count. The Cambodians don't count. The people from Laos don't count. 3 million people don't count. But 51,000 really counts. It's that mindset, that sort of cancerous mindset that is pervasive. A lot of people buy into it, even people of color. They repeat the same things. They repeat the same lies. So that's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the United States and how they completely ethnic cleanse, in other words, killing population off, and what the South Afrikaners were able to do in partitioning, in creating those Bantustans and pushing people off their lands and wreaking millions and millions and billions of dollars. This is the world we live in. No one reacted more angrily than the two states that voted no for it, that being Israel and the United States, with the vote that took place at the General Assembly. In other words, quote unquote, it's a popular vote because the majority voted 138 to 9 with, I think, 43 abstentions. So what you got was this kind of reaction from people that would have said, well, the vote, the General Assembly has spoken loud and clear. We're going to follow the vote. So it gives you what Miko just talked about, the double standard. We apply whenever we want. If the election goes our way, we're for elections. If the election goes the other way, well, we don't like elections. Let's go to the next clip. Let's see what it brings to us.
Arafat died with Israeli tanks surrounding his office under siege. But the myth that we're always told is that the Palestinians are not willing to make concessions. And that is the problem. I think Mitt Romney just alluded to this as well in that little secret tape that was recorded. The problem is the Palestinians. They just don't want peace. Yasser Arafat was willing to give up almost 80% of his homeland and the right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homeland and be compensated, all for the sake of peace. What he wouldn't do is he wouldn't go beyond, he wouldn't go, less than 20%. He wouldn't give up the West Bank and the Gaza. That he couldn't do. They want him to give up even more. They want him to sign a surrender agreement, and he wouldn't. It's not the Palestinians that aren't willing to make concessions. It's Israel that's incapable of making concessions, because concessions on the land are impossible from a Zionist perspective. The whole name of the game is taking the land and making it ours. And this is exactly the process that took place. Please. Now, once again, like I said, the book goes in and out of my own personal family history and the history of the State of Israel and how the two are related. This is a picture of my niece, Madar. And on September the 4th, 1997, she was killed. 2 young Palestinians blew themselves up in Jerusalem, took their own lives, and the lives of several Israelis, including her. She was 13 years old. So when a 13-year-old little girl that you know and love gets killed like this, you don't really know what to do. You don't know what to think, you don't know what to feel, you don't know how you're going to get back to life after that. Now, she was a granddaughter of a famous general, so this was big news. On top of that, she was also the granddaughter of Mr. Peace with Palestine. And now look what they did to him. Look what they did to his granddaughter. My father had already passed away by then. So this was big news. And when I landed, when I arrived in Jerusalem, my sister's house, on the ground, I saw the morning paper, and on the front page it already said the granddaughter of General Peled was killed by Palestinians. And my sister's apartment was packed with mourners, of course, people who came to express their sorrow, but also reporters. Endless stream of reporters. And after the funeral, she came out to greet and see everybody. She said 2 things that put me on a path. And I think it put her on a path, and many of us kind of helped us to wrap our heads around this unspeakable tragedy. The first thing she was asked, of course, is about revenge and retaliation. And the comment that she made was, no real mother would want this to happen to another mother. Don't talk to me about revenge. Motherhood is a uniting force. It cuts through religion. It cuts through any differences that might exist between us. And if she's anything above all, she is a mother. She's got 3 other boys, wonderful boys. And the second thing she said was, my government is responsible. My government brought these 2 young men to such a level of despair that they would take their own lives and take the lives of other innocent people, including a 13-year-old girl. The brutal oppression under which the Palestinians have to live because of us is the cause of this. That is why this is happening. If we want this to happen, we have to lift the oppression. As long as Palestinians are denied hope, and denied freedom, and denied water, and denied their land and their homes, this will continue to happen. I point a finger at my own government. And
the first thing that I would say, if people don't understand what he just said, especially pertaining to deny water, Israel controls whatever goes in and out, even to the use of water from especially in the Gaza area. They control that, which has really been called 1.6 million people. That's really in a concentration camp. They control the borders, and usually also on the other side of the border where you have Egypt. Egypt does pretty much the bidding of the United States and also Israel. And even irrespective of what you're seeing right now with the new president, Morsi, he will continue to do the exact same thing. The army is a tool of the United States in this big, what is called the grand chessboard, and it's a very important game. And we will go over this. But to me, what is really the story here, because like any other story, interwoven in it are many other issues that give you strength. It gives you a sense of being. And I think the Peled family, him talking about Miko and his sister, it's a story of people with courage because they are privileged. He's the son of a general. He doesn't have to do this. He shakes the trees because he speaks of humanity. She loses her daughter and she says, my government is responsible for this. This is the language of courage. This is the language of humility. This is the language of humanity. And it speaks loudly. And I'll tell you, it's very hard to find that in the United States. You do find it with Norman Finkelstein. And right now, Miko is and lives in the United States. And he will be touring and speaking openly and pushing people to move to the next level where this kind of consistent oppression must stop, not only here in Palestine, but in other places. So, because there is another story to be told, and as we move forward, we will look at it, because I want to give you a very good analysis of what's at stake politically to keep what is called the status quo, creating these kinds of crisis situations, because those that create the crisis, they are the ones that come up with the answers themselves. They have their ready-made answers all the time. So we will look into that. We have I think, the final clip, and let's listen to it and see where we are.
Been to Kalandia or any of the major checkpoints, you see the sign. It's about the size of one of these walls. It's a massive sign. And as you can see, it's white letters over a red background, which usually means danger. And of course, it's in Hebrew. And what the sign says is that this road leads to Area A, which is under Palestinian control. An entry to Israelis into Area A is forbidden. It's life-threatening, and it's a felony. And if you notice, there are 2 exclamation marks. So if you're not scared yet, the 2 exclamation marks will probably do the trick. Now you'll also notice that unless you can read Hebrew, this is irrelevant. It's only true if you can read Hebrew. Now, if you see a sign like that, and you have any sense at all, you turn around and go home. Who in his right mind would see a sign that says danger, firing zone, and walk right into it? My good fortune was that I don't have that kind of sense, and that I have many friends who don't have that kind of sense, and we went right through. And I've been going right through these checkpoints and right through that sign every single time I go visit my friends on the other side of the wall. And what's interesting is I always see the same thing. From the very first time all the way to today, it's been several years, every time I cross that wall, every time I cross the sign, I see the exact same thing. I see traffic jams. I see children going to school, which is probably the most common sight in Palestinian areas, is children coming and going to school. I see people going to work. I see shops. I've yet to see the Palestinians that want to kill me. I've yet to see the Palestinians ready with machine guns and tanks and F-16s ready to bomb me because I'm an Israeli. I've yet to see that. And I know that many other Israelis who do this haven't seen it either. And with time, I began to realize that this sign has nothing to do with security. The wall has nothing to do with security. The massive armed Israeli forces along the road have nothing to do with security. The terrorizing and harassment that Palestinian Israelis go through when they go through Tel Aviv airport, the humiliating process that they have to go through, they have to endure every time they decide to leave and go overseas, has nothing to do with security. It has everything to do with racism, with hatred, and with a deep desire to keep us apart, to keep me privileged and them with no rights. That's the name of the game. That's what it's all about. And that's the purpose of the sign.
Well, I think from what he just talked about, it gives you how you can turn the tables all the time, as you can point to security issues where you can tighten up and do a bunch of different things. It can give you more latitude to act as a state. But what I'd like to speak about really is the difference between we have to, there's no question about it, a suicide bomber, young kids, in their 20s, whatever, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older as well, that can put a bomb on themselves and walk into a bus, walk into a crowded area. But what you've never heard, what you'll never hear, is the pervasive state terror that Israel itself does, that Israel has been able to sort of act. Israel can attack Iraq. Israel has attacked Iran and has killed scientists. Israel has attacked Sudan. Israel has attacked Lebanon. Israel has attacked every country in that region indiscriminately. No problem. Not one word from the United States. And it gives you, if the king at the top is corrupt, it's like the fish. If the fish is not corrupted from the body, it's corrupted from the top. It corrupts everything else. And so what Israel has is Israel has carte blanche. And in conclusion, we will look at the grand chessboard. We will look at why that is. Because Israel is the key player in the Middle East. It is the arm, the activist arm of the United States. It can act freely, and the United States can play the double game. It can say, well, we didn't do it, but we're going to support Israel. We shouldn't have done it, but we have to be supportive of Israel. But they work in concert with each other. And I think if Obama said one thing truthfully when he was in the debate, he says that we work hand in hand with Israel on a number of intelligence action. And I will say, you will not understand the immense amount of work that the CIA and the Mossad does or do in this world today. You will not understand it. And so therefore, but that is the essence of what's being discussed here. So I think we have one more clip. Is that?
Once again, going back to the question, is one state the right thing? Is two states the right thing? Are three states the right thing? Somebody gave me something, about a confederation. The reality is that Israel had created a one state. The borders, in terms of from Israeli perspective, are very clear. The borders of the state of Israel are the Jordan River on the east and the Mediterranean on the west. That's it. If you look at Israeli school books, if you look at the weather maps, if you look at any official maps of the state of Israel, it is absolutely clear. There is no question in anybody's mind what the borders of the state of Israel are. That's it. So the notion that there could be an Israeli government that would give up some of that is absolutely absurd. And Israel governs this one state very skillfully with three different sets of laws. You have the laws that govern people like myself, Israeli Jews, who can come and go and say what they please. Pretty much a democratic state for all purposes. You've got the laws that govern the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, and there are over 30 laws in the law books that discriminate against them specifically, and you've got an entire culture of discrimination against them that is deep-seated and deep-rooted in Israeli society. And then you've got the laws that govern the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and this is really at the pleasure of the Israeli army. If they want to destroy, they destroy. If they want to arrest and beat, they arrest and beat. If they want to torture, they torture. If they want to kill, they kill. And Palestinians have no recourse. This is the reality. There's an education system, the Zionist education system, like Judith alluded, my sister just wrote a book about it. She's an educator, that teaches racism in a very subtle way. There's a bureaucracy, an entire bureaucracy, that is dedicated to making life impossible for Palestinians through all kinds of restrictions and permits and requirements that are absolutely uncalled for and unnecessary, but are all given and provided under the guise of security. And then you've got the Israeli army, which I like to refer to as one of the best trained, best equipped, best fed terrorist organizations in the world. And yes, they have generals and they have nice uniforms, but their entire purpose is terrorism. And just as one example, I'll give you one example. almost exactly 4 years ago, as Israel began its attack on Gaza, September the 27th, 2008, at 11:25 in the morning. What I refer to as the most shameful day in the Jewish history. The most shameful day in the history of the Jewish people. Israel began carpet bombing Gaza, and on the first day of what was to be a 21-day attack, they dropped 100 tons of bombs. Okay, a 1-ton bomb will decimate an entire city block. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. 800,000 children live in Gaza. 11:25 is exactly the time when the morning school shift and the afternoon school shift change. So all the kids are in the streets. All the children are on the streets. That was the moment decided by the decision makers in Israel to begin the attack. This was the first day of a 21-day slaughter that had absolutely no justification. If that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. And this is how the state of Israel manages to control the different populations and somehow still keep up this very sweet, liberal kind of face to everything.
Well, the sweet, liberal kind of face that it can keep, it's because you can control the press. AP, all the different press that comes out around the world, from Associated Press to Reuters, and it's managed news. Quite often it comes all the way down to infomercials, you know. So very little information and much more down to commercials and everything else. So that's why Israel can get away with this. But also it deals, like I said, it says volume about the kind of world we're living in, where who runs the world can pretty much see this kind of happening as normacy, because it's the other. It's the non-valued, it's the valueless grouping that can get their beatings and no big deal. But I think Miko says it well enough. He talked about what he considers the military of Israel to be, a terrorist grouping. And you can go on, and we could certainly pick a bunch of other armies that have done pretty much the same, that are very much in cahoots with Israel, that are pretty much in the same realm. They're just terrorist armies anyway. But I want to speak about something else. I want to speak about two things in closing. And I'm going to speak first about the Palestinians. I think the Palestinians have to continue to undress the situation, to undress the military side of Israel. And you're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. And I speak to them specifically. They're not going to do it by sending missiles over there to Jerusalem or other parts of Israel. It's not going to do anything. It's only going to continue the slaughter of Palestinians. I think at this point in time, with the gain that the Palestinians have gotten, I think the best way to disarm Israel is to disarm themselves. And I say that very seriously after prolonged thought on this issue, because there is a movement afoot, not just in the Middle East, but around the world, and even progressive Jews that have gained consciousness to see this. When you fight, you don't fight for the outskirts, you fight for the large middle. The large middle are still taken by the fact that a suicide bomber can be a suicide bomber in New York City, a suicide bomber in Georgia, a suicide bomber anywhere around the world. So they feel affected. They have to denounce these things. They have to move past these things. Because the more you do it, the more it brings to light the criminality, the human rights violations that is constant with Israel. That is my take on it, and people should take it for what it's worth. And I'm not a pacifist. I can't say that I am. I'd love to say I fully endorse that philosophy. But to be fair and to be honest, I haven't. But I do feel that as a tactical and a strategic position for the Palestinians, they need to move with that position. The grand chessboard is really what's at stake. What does the grand chessboard mean? It means you have to have key players in certain areas that can literally control the area. Israel, like I said, has the right of way, has carte blanche internationally to hit whichever country that it deems, and says it's for self-defense. So in fact, Israel uses the notion of preemptive strike. But more importantly, what does it do for the United States? Most people don't know this, but Israel is the only country in that area that also has nuclear warheads. It has hundreds of nuclear warheads. The other countries don't. So therefore, last time we spoke, and I mentioned this, I said, Iran has not attacked a country for over 250 years. The United States, that is not right now, has pursued and has fought to get as many people, especially in the European side, to get on board with them as they blockade, an economic blockade on Iran. Because Iran might have or might want to get a nuclear capability. And what does that do? What does it do? Because in fact, there is a very interesting point. Because I will tell you this, that would achieve what is called in politics equilibrium. Equilibrium will be met if you have an Iranian state in that region that has nuclear weapons. And this is what they're fighting against. Because it literally annuls the strength that Israel has today. And Israel is a much better prepared army. Israel is a much better armed army. It gets all its technology from the U.S. to the point now it's been able to sort of create its own technology. Israel, I think, is the initial creator of the drones. So this is what you're seeing. So you bring in a European grouping, you put it in the Middle East, you create crisis whenever you want, you deal with the resources, you steal resources all the time. While you're attacking, you're creating, a tension and crisis with Palestine. You're in other places, you're going there. So it creates this kind of, out of chaos comes opportunity for them. So that's the grand chessboard. For people that understand this game, that understand how they play their game, to get any kind of counter, Iran gets a nuclear weapon, and Israel cannot play that game anymore. Israel is literally at a standstill. And a stalemate creates peace. It's like if you go to a gunfight, I have a water pistol, and you have a real gun with bullets, that's an easy one. So if we both have guns with bullets, that's the equilibrium. Now we understand that either one could die. It depends who's fastest, depends who shoots straighter. Those are the issues. So in essence, that's the conversation. I hope that what we've been able to do today, especially with two people doesn't speak volume for everyone, but it gives you a different take. And everything that they've said, you should double check on it. You should do your homework. You should pursue it. But I think from what Miko Peled, especially coming from what is called an inside position, to sort of come out of that and look at the world, not in that unidimensional world that most people look at the world in, but a multidimensional, in a multiplicity of views within one, then you begin to see the world for what it is. Because if you could see yourself, then you should be able to see the other. And the other is no different than you, except, you know what? You have more guns, you have more nuclear weapons, and you have more big friends that can do more things to hurt people. And that's pretty much what's going on. So I hope this show, I want to give you this in closing. This was the last series of a group of 4 shows that we would have been doing in English. We'll begin to do some shows in Creole. But also I have probably one more show that I have to do on Sunday, possible. It's a possibility, but that's something that we will look at. But for the month of December, we're hoping that we can diversify and bring something that can not only we keep English speaking people with us, but also we begin to entertain more directly with our Haitian folks that speak only Creole, in Haiti in particular, but in the United States, many of our brothers and sisters are already speaking that language, so we're keen to sort of work with them and open up that space. And again, we want to thank everybody that have, again, written on YouTube and have written comments and have taken time to sort of look at the videos and give their opinions, and many of them have said thank you. We've had maybe one person who weren't too happy with the criticism that we levied at Michel Martelly, and we were really, as far as I'm concerned, I was really graceful with him because he could really get more, and you could never finish with Michel Martelly. He's really indefensible anyway, and repulsive most of the time. So that's the reality. And people still have the mindset of don't question authority. I say it's the other way around. Authority is there to be questioned. And what we have to do is continue to bring light to especially abuse of authority, which is constant, both in Haiti, in the United States, in Israel, and many places around the world. I thank you for watching. You were watching Thinking Without Borders with the beautiful studios of African Caribbean Radio and Television. Much appreciated. We'll see you next week.